Let's get scratching.
We got an explosive broadcast coming to you. Listen up. Sega games, just keep playing them. Sega!
We're back. It's the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show. Get ready for Sega interviews and news. Hello and welcome to the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show. I'm Barry. With me is a special co-host, Javed, aka Aki-At, who is a contributor for SEGAbits, and he's also working on the game Crocodile. Hello, Javed.
Hello, Barry. How you doing? You all right?
I'm great. I love that. Wow, look at that enthusiasm. This is going to be a proper episode. And then we are joined by our very special guest, Matt Phillips, who was the creator of Tanglewood. Well, what roles would you assign yourself? Everything?
Pretty much. Apart from the artwork and the music, I outsource. But yeah, everything else pretty much me.
Okay.
He's pretty much God.
Yes, God. Matt Phillips is joining us. And so Tanglewood released just recently, and it's released for the Mega Drive, Genesis, and also available on Steam. And this was following a successful Kickstarter campaign. Now, are there any other platforms that I missed?
Let me run through them. PC, Windows, Mac, Linux, Dreamcast.
Oh, right. Yes.
Mega Drive, Genesis, and hopefully, if all goes to plan, Amiga 500.
Okay. Oh, that's really cool. So, how's the Dreamcast development going? What's the plans for that?
It's a complete rewrite because obviously the original's written in assembly language, so it doesn't translate very well, and it's too slow to run the emulated version. So we're doing a complete rewrite now. We've got most of the first chapter working. So it's coming along pretty considerably because the cartridges haven't shipped yet. So we've had a bit of downtime waiting for all the parts for that. So I've been able to blast through the Dreamcast version.
Oh, nice.
Coming really well.
Is there anything extra you're going to put on the Dreamcast version, or is it going to be like completely identical to the Mega Drive version?
No, it's a full rewrite. So we're doing a bit of redesign work as well. So yeah, that hopefully there'll be an extra level. At least, certainly extra boss fights. I'd like to add some extra endings, things like that. Quite a lot, actually. More collectibles, more secret areas. I've got a big list of things to add to it.
So before we dive into how you started, your past with gaming, how would you describe Tanglewood? Because I'm kind of waffling between platformer, puzzle game. What would you describe it as?
It's a cinematic puzzle platformer, I guess.
Okay.
I usually get asked to compare it to other games. I'm not sure I've ever sat down and thought, actually, what is it in its own context? I usually answer Another World. Abe's Odyssey.
Okay. Yes, I love that game. So I'm curious, what games and consoles did you grow up with?
I started out on the Commodore 64. I think my first game and favorite game was Buggy Boy.
Oh, what was that?
It was a single-player racing game. Obviously, on the C64, it was quite a primitive racing game, but it was one I very fondly remember. I remember the intro screen, the soundtrack. Most of the sound effects are still stuck in my head 20-odd years later.
Yeah, so it gives you the warm fuzzies when you revisit it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I love the thing. What else did I play? Things like Ghosts and Goblins, lots of puzzle games, that sort of stuff. I love the Commodore. Absolutely adored the thing.
You still have it?
Yeah, yes, I do. It's not in the best of conditions, but it still works. What do I move on to? Mega Drive next. Started out by borrowing a Mega Drive from a family friend, and had a Sonic and the Terminator. I think that were the mini games I got. I remember rushing home from school as fast as I could to go and get more time with the thing. I think about 2 weeks later, it was ripped from my sobbing hands and gone back.
Oh no!
I had to wait till Christmas to get one of my own.
Did you have a large library of games, or did you really stick to like a core amount for a good number of years?
I had my core favorites. I had an embarrassing collection for such a die-hard Sega fan.
No, that's understandable. I'm with you there. I had a Sega Genesis from 1991 through to 1998, and that was the only Sega console I owned, and I probably had 15 games. And they kept me busy. So
I don't remember where I had my Mega Drive. If it's from 1990 or maybe I think maybe 1990 because I remember Revenge Sonic 1 was out yet. But what happened was, unfortunately, by the end of it, sadly, my mom decided, like, oh, we've got the Sega Saturn now, so you can give this to your cousin. Like, what? No, don't give it to my cousins. But obviously, as a 7-year-old, I can't really argue much back to my mom. So it was like, no, my Mega Drive. Why?
that's awful.
Still got mine.
So Matt, what led from you enjoying video games to wanting to develop video games, and what was your first project that you worked on?
It all sort of happened all together, really. I mean, once I got bored of playing the games on my Commodore, I started flicking through the manual, and it was back in the days where it came with instructions on how to program. You right there?
Oh,
Yeah, because Europe obviously had a big like homebrew community for indie deving even back in the 90s, which is quite interesting. That was it back then that you got into it, or more like towards the 2000s?
I'd wanted to do it since childhood, really. All the way since programming like basic text adventures and things on my Commodore. I never really made anything big or memorable. It was all just small little things. I wasn't very good at it either until I got into my late teens. But it's definitely something I always wanted to do, something I always dabbled with throughout my life. And I tried and tried, failed and failed. It was only until I got around university where I started to get the hang of it.
So what kind of what resources were out there to learn how to do this? Because I can't even imagine back then thinking how I could get into this. What sort of paths did you have in front of you?
In the early days, not a lot. There was things like printouts from magazines. If you remember when the listings used to be printed in magazines, things like basic ski games and stuff like that. So you take the magazine home, type in all the listings, hope you didn't make a mistake, and then it would work.
Oh, wow.
Mostly from that, it was trial and error. So then you change something to see what happened and just experiment, really. I lived out in the country, so I didn't have many friends close who also did this kind of thing. We didn't have a library or anything like that to get books out. So I was sort of on my own until we moved into a town where I had access to a library and things like that. And I borrowed a lot of books on microcomputers and things like that. And I think the internet changed it. I learned of the existence of C++. I started dabbling with some basic C++ and things like that. And one of the big tools that really helped was something called Dart Basic, which was a DirectX version of Basic. So you could have basic 3D models on screen, all textured and lit, and then press buttons to move things around, stuff like that. And I made so much stuff in Dart Basic, it really helped. So probably the biggest tool that helped it kick off properly.
And so Tanglewood, was that your first game from start to finish to publishing?
No, after university, I joined Traveller's Tales.
That's right.
And I worked on many Lego games, 13 of the things, I think.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And one movie. I wrote some of the special effects tech for a film they were working on too, so I got my name on that as well.
Wow.
I then moved on to Crytek, worked on Homefront: The Revolution. And then I started my Kickstarter and I moved on to my own thing. So I'd had quite a lot of AAA experience with modern tools, modern languages. But as far as assembly language for a 16-bit console was concerned, I sort of had to start again, really. I had to go back to the drawing board. I had to unlearn a load of bad habits and things that wouldn't have helped me.
Yeah, because sorry to interrupt. I was like, because obviously nowadays, we've got so much extra power when it comes to a console that you can be a bit lazy and like, I don't need to optimize this so much. But when you're going straight back to the Mega Drive, you probably had to be more mindful of how much memory you're actually using.
Yeah, a lot of mistakes as well. A lot of getting it wrong. Try something out. It uses up all the memory and crashes and burns. Go lower level, then lower level, then lower level until you figure out where you can make your savings.
So when you were working on those Lego games, was there like a progression in your development and like lessons being learned from past games there? Or was it much more of moving from game to game and kind of repeating the success you had?
Yeah, there was a lot of repetition from game to game, especially when they're Lego games, because obviously it's a very similar format.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy your time working on them?
Oh yeah, certainly did. Yeah, it wasn't something like a reskin. You look at two Lego games side by side, and the similar model, similar gameplay, and a lot of code was obviously reused. But the engine was changing from game to game so rapidly. There was so much work to do, constantly. Always challenges to figure out. Always new roadblocks with the next game. That and new platforms coming along all the time. I think I started on a Wii game there. I mean, we transitioned through to Wii U, to Switch. What else do we have? There was the PS4 came out through that time. The Xbox One came out through that time. The PlayStation Vita. I went through that transition. The 3DS. So many wonderful platforms to port the engine to. There was always something to do.
Now, did you work on the Dimensions games at all?
I'm afraid not. No, I was there during some of the early prototypes, but I didn't get to see much of it.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. So, so in regards to Tanglewood, I know Aki has quite a few questions about the gameplay, the development. So, kind of want to hand the reins over to him for some questions here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barry. Yeah, Matt, I was going to ask you, like, with Tangle was a pretty interesting game. But what did you like draw inspiration from, like the design aspects for Tanglewood?
Mostly platformers I grew up with. Platformer was my favorite genre, and I've been playing them all through my life. Things like Sonic, Flashback, Another World. I like cinematic platformers with incidental moment-to-moment gameplay. That's why I really like the Delphine. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Their games, anyway.
Right. Yeah. Because when I was sorry to interrupt you. Carry on.
All the way through PS1 era. So things like Skull Monkeys are one of my favorites there. What else did I play? Abe's Odyssey, Heart of Darkness, and lots of modern ones as well. I really like Playdead's games, Limbo and Inside, that sort of stuff.
Because when I was playing through, it was like, because it did feel as well that I'm not sure. Did you get any inspiration for stuff like Fantastic Dizzy as well, or any other, say, European platformers? Because it did feel like I was playing, so like, this feels actually very British in its design, how it's designed itself.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah, I played a lot of Dizzy games. What did I have? There was a Spectrum game I had, which I think was Dizzy. This is going to jog my memory a bit because I don't remember much of my Spectrum days. Yeah, lots of British games because obviously everything came on tape back then, and you could only get it from local markets and things like that. So the only games we really had there were British ones. You'd be lucky to import something from outside.
Yeah, that's true. Because, like I said, it's interesting just seeing out because it's like when you're playing games from back then, you can see there's a clear different mindset in how the Japanese developers made their games and how the British developers made their games. So I felt like, oh, this definitely feels pretty British. But when it comes to the art direction, were you looking at stuff like Sonic to like come up with it, or you're looking at again maybe British stories or media to come up with how you want it to look?
It was mostly games. I watched a lot of TV as a kid, lots of cartoons, things like that. I can't think of much of that had an influence really. It was all games. I was especially fond of the Disney platformers, things like Lion King,
That's
there's probably a lot of influence from those. Obviously, I watched all the films, but the actual inspiration came from the games themselves and their formula and how they all worked.
Yeah, I was telling Javed before we were recording that the one game it really reminded me of as soon as it started was The Lion King with obviously the trees, and it doesn't feel like your typical kind of Mario or Sonic platformer where it's very clear this is where you stand. Very flat, bricked kind of Mario Maker sort of layouts, if that makes sense. It was much more natural, and it also reminded me of Echo the Dolphin a bit.
Yeah, a lot of people say that when it comes up. Yeah, well, there's a lot of curves in there, lots of curved branches and trees and things like that. And certainly the animation style, because the run animation of Nim was heavily inspired by Simba from The Lion King. I think we did a frame test originally of Simba to see how it was going to work. Yeah, so that worked out really well, taking inspirations from Lion King.
Right, yeah, it's quite good. I was going to ask you, because obviously you worked with Traveler's Tale and Deep Silver. Were you able to take like experience that you gained design? Were you working mainly as a programmer, or did you do any designing of those the Lego games or Homefront as well? And were you able to like take it into Tanglewood?
I was mostly a programmer, but I was a rather opinion programmer. If I wanted some design input, I'd try my best to force its way in there. Yeah, I did take a lot of inspiration from how, especially processes, how things were done there. How a design would go from concept through up the ranks up into prototype stage to actually make it in the game. The kind of things QA would test for, the kind of tweaks you'd have to make to level designs and things like that. I took a lot on board from those two companies, and only so much of it can apply back to the 16-bit era, but there's still a fair chunk of stuff I brought with me.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously that this relates to my next question. I was going to ask you, like, because you're now obviously the director of the game, so you were able to take you were able to see like your other senior managers or the director of the project, see how they handled it. Were you able to like put it into this game, and how did you find it?
Sort of. Both companies were a bit chaotic when it came to who was responsible for precisely what. It was very much a team effort. Lots of people would have their fingers in lots of pies. So I don't think there was any flat hierarchy or any sort of chain of command that was strictly adhered to. It was more if somebody had a cool idea, all it took was the right person to listen to actually kick something into action. And when you're working on your own, that's very different. If I have an idea that I want to try, I will put it in and I will try it. Which was quite different when you're working for a team, especially a team as big as that. I think TT was pushing 200 employees at that point. So yeah, very very different ways of working, but there were bits of crossover here and there.
Yeah, because obviously, I mean, with those teams, because they're so big, like direct, immediate next to your colleague, you'll know who that is. But when you've got a team of 200 and someone, you might have the artist all the way in the other side of the building, you don't even know who they are. So, but as now you're an indie developer, you know everyone who's. I mean, I think how big roughly was your team size?
5 or 6, I think.
Five.
Depends on the point of the project. So they were contractors, so they'd sort of come and go, really.
Right, yeah, because I noticed that Matthew Wicks, sorry, was one of your pixel artists, but he also did some designing on the game, wasn't it?
Yeah, he did a lot of the level design. Obviously, with such a small team size, if he's got an idea, he'll just email me. I'll give it a try. So pretty much everybody chipped into the design at some point on some level.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt Weeks had experience on Freedom Planet as well. He did the artwork for that. And I think he had some level design input there too. So I think he'd already had experience.
Reason I remember his name is because I had him work on Brock for a few couple of levels as well. So it's like, oh, okay. So I see Matt is still getting around as well. But yeah, so like I said, you've got the ability to like oversee everything as a director. And you've said you found it slightly less chaotic than your other roles because you like overseeing everyone together. Have you learned something new towards it now as the director, and like if you take it into your next project?
Yeah, I've learned to not do so much yourself. Absolute nightmare. I'm gonna hire hire a full team next time and try and offload a bit more work. It's been such a stressful thing. I'd like to retain control of as much as I can because I'd like to design these games in my vision. But in practice, it just doesn't work. It gets you really stressed out. The game takes twice as long as it needs to. And other people have a lot better ideas, it seems. So,
Because it's interesting you say that. It's interesting you say that because when I was first deciding it, like way back in 2011, I'm like, no, I want to do everything myself. And then as I went along, it's like, wait, I'm not an artist, nor am I a musician. This stuff isn't as good as it should probably be. And I had to rework a few of the arts and get different tracks in as well. And it's like I just mainly enjoy doing level design. So it's like at first, because obviously you want to feel like because it's obviously the project is very personal to you, so you want to make sure you've got a hand on everything.
Yeah, there is a moment of clarity where it just clicks. Hang on a minute, this is the most stressful and inefficient way I could be doing this. What am I doing this for?
It's interesting because as video game when the press is involved, they always try to say, look, this one person made this game, like Hideo Kojima, he's behind everything. But when you actually go into the process, you find that wait, there are like 50 other people who are involved in coming up with some of these ideas, but they never get any of the press. So we kind of get this false narrative on how games are actually designed, where we think it's one person's vision, but the bigger the game gets, it's now multiple people's visions.
Yeah, I don't think solo dev is ever really solo dev. You could probably make 85-90% of the game, but the last 10%, it won't even get released unless you get outside help for it. So whether directly or indirectly, there are always outside influences. There are always people cheering you on. There are people doing little favors for you or finding information for you. I don't think there's any such thing as solo development purely.
Mm. Another question I wanted to ask you was because obviously you're working on the Mega Drive and there are some restrictions. What was like some gameplay elements or some stage gimmicks that you needed to drop after you like, wait, hang on a second, this isn't gonna work at all?
Yeah, one of the big things, but this was more a performance thing, was buoyancy, because there's a lot of water in the game, and I want a lot of things floating. And I had a load of mechanics based on the fact that fuzzles could float, or boulders or crates could float, and there were certain ways of pushing them around. And I had a load of puzzle designed around that, but it was quite an expensive thing to do on the CPU because it's only 7 megahertz processor. It's one of the big things eating up performance. So unfortunately, that had to go. I had to redesign it all. That's just one example, but yeah, there was a lot of stuff that had to be reworked or cut because it just wasn't working, either from a performance standpoint or memory standpoint. That was probably a bigger deal, actually. So little space for anything there.
Yeah, because like when I reviewed the game, I was like, you can't necessarily think about it like, oh, why didn't it do this or that? Because it's like it is actually a game that's meant to be for the '90s, early '90s. So you can't say, oh, why hasn't there this type of effect, or why don't you just do this instead? It's like I had to take my mindset back into the '90s and think, all right, let me think of some other games that released at around this sort of time frame and review it as such. And even then, it's like some games like Sonic. I couldn't really look at Sonic and think, why couldn't you do it like that? Because when you read the development history of Sonic, like, oh, Yuji Naga only slept for like 5 hours a day for 11 months straight. It's like, I'm pretty sure you didn't have the same sort of negative lifestyle as he did you?
Well, you say that.
Oh no.
The problem is back then that sort of thing was glorified. It would have been written in the magazine because they'd have thought that was cool. Yeah, this guy's so dedicated. He only gets 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. Look at him go. You too, kids, can aspire to do this one day. And I think in recent years, everybody's gone, hang on a minute, this is really stupid. Everybody's making mistakes. Everybody's showing up late for work. What is going on? So yeah, I did do a little bit of that, but it's not good for you. It shouldn't be glorified. It makes for a worse game. Don't do it. I just now and again I get carried away, and I think I can do that for the better of the game, and then for the next few days I have to clear up the mess I left when I did it.
Right, yeah, because obviously if you like work late, like in 2 or 3 a.m., you might be doing something in the code, and without realizing you've just done something that's going to like the next day you come back like, hang on a second, that's not a good thing. Why did I do that? And it's like even minor issues, because like when it comes to like the capital letter N or the lowercase n, it makes a big difference without you realizing. In that middle of the night, you don't understand why is this code not working, but it's usually just a miss.
Beyond a certain point of exhaustion, you're just writing bugs, not code.
Yeah.
I had a question from the player side. I've been playing games for years, and there's this password system. How does that work? Like, I know it's a string of weird letters, but how do those letters dictate where I'm dropped back into the game and inventory being a certain amount and such? Is that something you could explain to me?
Yeah, sure. Well, the clue there is that the letters only run from 0 to 9 and then A to F. So it's actually hexadecimal you're writing there. Those are raw bytes. That's raw data. There's 8 characters you enter, which is 8 nibbles of data. So 4 bytes, 8 bytes. I'm too tired for this math.
It's hard.
No, 8 characters you're right. So that's 4 bytes of memory. That's all packed in. So each one of those hexadecimal nibbles will be things like the number of fireflies in the current act. Well, up to 3 firefly counts because you've got acts 1, 2, and 3 for each level. So it'll store you have 6 fireflies on Act 1, 2 fireflies on Act 2. And you're on the 3rd level now, so 0 fireflies. It'll store the level ID. So the 28 levels in the game, each one's assigned an ID, so it'll store in there you're on level 15. And at the end of it is a checksum, so you add all bytes together, and that reaches a certain number. So if you enter the wrong password, the checksum won't match up, and it won't let you load that level. That makes it really difficult to either make a mistake when you're entering it or for somebody to just guess a password and try and get in.
Interesting. Yeah, because I always thought it was kind of unfair that, reviewers and especially people doing videos now where, like Angry Video Game Nerd and such, they'll bitch about the password system, but I'm like, there's got to be a reason why it's, that many characters. I think the only real thing to criticize would be how they handle entering it, like not allowing you to move the cursor from one end of the screen to the other immediately. I thought your password screen was well handled, though. I liked that going downwards, and you could go pick each character at a time rather than typing it out with a keyboard on the screen. I appreciated that.
The vertical layout rather than horizontal was actually a bug.
Oh, really? I liked it.
The QA guys came back and said, "Can you leave it like this? It's so much faster than when it used to work properly."
Huh. Wow. Well, there you go. Thank goodness for bugs.
Yeah, I know. It's like, that goes back to indie devs. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
It's a feature, yeah. Well, I did fix the bug, but then I reworked the UI to look like that properly. Because that's what QA told me was working best, so that's what we get.
Interesting. One other thing is the story itself. Because when I started playing it, I thought this was just going to have a very normal, have to defeat the bad guy type of story. I don't want to spoil too much of the game, but there is an emotional point that it gets to, and it's like, oh, everything's different now. I was not expecting this at all. So, like, what kind of like inspired you to go down that type of route? Because it's obviously a big thing when something. I don't want to say when it happens, but it's like you didn't see it coming.
That was mostly Limbo's fault, I think. I wanted a dark, moody platformer that lulled you into a false sense of security. That it was going to be a nice, fun romp through the world of Harlequin Forest. And turns out, no, it's not. It suddenly gets really nasty. I wanted something a little bit different. I didn't want a happy, bright mascot platformer like Mario or Sonic. I wanted something with a little bit of grit to it. And you can only go so far by just throwing more enemies at the player or reusing the time of day trick again. To try and keep the whole thing fresh, I had to do something a little bit drastic to try and keep people on their toes and just sort of refresh the game halfway through so it turns into something a little bit different.
Yeah, because like you first think it comes in, you're thinking, so it's like a fox. I'm assuming it's like Sonic, and then like midway through, like, oh wait, this is actually Watership Down. Oh no.
Oh.
Yeah, I guess the British aspect comes back into that a bit. We grew up with cartoons like that.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because we have a lot of cartoons that are unassuming. It's like, wait, no, this is actually more horrible than you thought, kids.
And it's interesting too because you were bringing up earlier how the game, Aki was saying, Javed, that the game plays, similarly to these classic games. However, there is that darker element that I don't think, had this game been going through the normal processes, like someone like Tom Kalinske might look at it in America and go, "Nah, this won't do. Please change this." There would definitely be some executive interference, I think. If it was, yeah. Would you push back? Like, let's say you were in that setting. Would you push back and say, "I'm not finishing this game if you don't let me go ahead with this"? Would that be like a make or break for you?
I think now, with my experience, knowing what I know, I would say no. We finish this game my way, or I find another publisher. Probably
Right.
when I was starting out, I probably wouldn't have the balls to do that. I just sort of bend over and let them change anything, really.
It would have like sunglasses on the main character or something. Right?
Yeah, things like that. Like
Oh.
Pooch from the Simpsons style intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's interesting because like you had EA when they were working with Insomniac, I think, was it? And the game was called Fused or something. It was like a third-person shooter. It had a lot of style when they first showed the trailer, and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I love the look of this game." And then when they released another trailer 6 months later, they like watered down all the character that made the game unique, and it became like just generic third-person shooter number 2007. Um, and it's interesting because it's like you're trying to put obviously your own personal touch onto the game. So it's like you don't want a publisher to start interfering and saying, "Look, so and so have said they don't like this. You have to change it." But now you definitely feel like you made the right choice, seeing as how people are responding, saying, "You know what? That was actually a good idea you did." Have you found that with like a lot of the players who played the game?
I guess it depends what kind of position you're in. Obviously, if you're very, very much relying on their paycheck, there's only so much leverage you've got. I think my advice would be is to make sure your contract is watertight before you even start. Make sure that they can only intervene if it's a legal issue or a licensing issue, or they've got some very solid market research that says doing it this way would very seriously help. But otherwise, if they're paying somebody to design a game, they should pay them to design the game. They should just leave it alone.
Yeah. Or if they offer you like £1 billion, then you'd be like, "Yep, go ahead. You can do whatever you want."
Oh yeah, I mean, every man's got his price, I guess.
Oh, right. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought here for a second. Yeah, the next thing I was going to ask is like the game itself, finishing it, because this is like is it your first indie game you've made?
First indie game I finished.
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
I've
so
tried all sorts over the years, lots of experiments, maybe even had a couple of levels out of a few, but real life always got in the way.
yeah.
I guess the only one I finished is because I ran the Kickstarter and I had funding for it, and then I was able to quit my job and concentrate on this full time.
Yeah, because how's the reception been so far for it? Because it's like you were on the BBC, you got a segment on that, and then now you've probably got a lot of people coming up to it because you just went to EGX recently, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So how have you found the reception so far? And what does it mean? What does it personally mean to you?
and absolutely fantastic. I can't believe it's taken off like this. All the way since the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter flew through the asking price. I had so much press coverage. This BBC News thing that was absolutely terrifying, by the way. Um,
Because I noticed you got a tattoo for the Sonic 2 final boss, wasn't it?
Yeah. He got a lot of footage of my tattoo. He tried to sneak as much of that into the interview, I think. Yeah, so many. I've had things like I've had Eurogamer talk to me, Kotaku, loads of big gaming news sites. Lots of people coming up to me during events. I got filmed by the Gadget Show last week. It's just been absolutely enormous. And I can't believe it's happened like this. I knew that what I was doing was a little more interesting than your average indie pixel platformer because it was developed in the original style using the original tools of the 90s. And it actually runs on a real cartridge on the real hardware. I knew I'd get a couple of articles about it based on that alone. But people really like this. People really want this and they want more of this. I just didn't realize what kind of audience there was out there for this. I thought it'd be a neat thing. It's not. I've,
Yeah.
I've sold out of cartridges. I'm struggling to make more. So
You must have, because obviously the UK always had like a really strong scene when it comes to like the Sega Mega Drive. Have you like found it like replicated that somewhere maybe in Brazil? Because I know Brazil's got a really strong Sega fan base over there as well, or like other countries.
the result for the response from Brazil has been huge. There's been a lot of articles out there. Obviously, Tech Toy's still alive and well over there. They're still making Mega Drives over there. They've got their own revision of it. Huge in Brazil. The only problem with Brazil is it's really difficult to get my cartridges into the country.
Yeah, because obviously they've got that whole issue with tax. I mean, they tax video games like crazy over there.
Yeah, no, that's really bad. That I'd like to try and talk to Tectoy and see if we can get it manufactured over there so that we can sell in Brazil properly. I get a lot of people emailing me, ask if there's a better way they can get hold of the game over there, and unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you be open to it being included on a plug and play?
Yeah, certainly. I spoke to At Games earlier on in the year, try and secure something from that. But obviously, with this whole Mega Drive Mini thing going on,
Of course.
it's been really difficult to get hold of anybody. And recently, I think they dropped At Games. All mentions of Sega have been removed from their site. Put it that way.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay, I didn't know that. They've just been like erased.
Yeah. It just looks like Sega have sacked them off completely.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I'll hold my tongue on At Games machines and why Sega may have done it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad for for people at Games, but at the same time, for us as consumers of who buy these Sega games, like yes, I can finally look forward to proper emulation. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Your words.
One of those,
Yeah, sorry, my words. Oh no, I made a powerful enemy out there.
I think it was a case of fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Because they came out with 2 revisions of the thing, and I was so excited for the second one. I ran out and bought it, and no, it's just At Games being At Games again.
So next, another one I was going to ask you, and obviously this relates back to when we were talking about if an executive like meddled with the design of Tanglewood. What was the most important elements for the game itself, and that you'd say your red lines you can't change this at all?
Mostly the movement. I played a lot of games as research from the 16-bit days. One of the things that really stood out as being harsh was the movement style. Very few of these games had things like smooth acceleration and high velocity running and things like that. It didn't feel right when you walk, run, and jump. Sonic was probably the most fluid. I mean, it's got a bit of acceleration when you move. You can get up to high velocity. The jump velocity just feels right. Everything just feels right when you play Sonic. So I had a load of games playing alongside mine, and I was there tweaking values, trying to get movement right to match some other 16-bit platformers at the time. And every time it just didn't feel right. They all felt too sluggish, or just not smooth at all.
Almost robotic, rather, isn't it? Like you press the button and like you're moving 1 pixel forward or 2 pixels forward, and it doesn't seem right. Because it's an interesting you mentioned that. Because when I first played it, I was like thinking, this is slightly it felt slightly slippery, but it was like at the same time it reminded me more like a Sonic platformer because I just finished off Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, but that game has like no momentum at all. Like you can go forward and keep the momentum going, and as soon as you release the buttons, like Donkey Kong will stop and he will just drop straight onto the floor. There's nothing that will necessarily carry you completely forward unless you're pressing the buttons. And if there is, it's like you've only got it through the startup, and it doesn't feel necessarily natural either. And it's interesting because I feel it's almost like how Sega designed their platformers and how Nintendo designed their platformers. So with Sega, they added a little bit more extra chaos with the momentum. But when it came to how Nintendo designed it, it's like with Mario, he's very start and stop. As long as you let go of the button, he will just drop onto the floor. But with Sonic, you'd like have to, if you're moving right, you have to start hitting left, or else you're going to keep going right no matter what.
Yeah, you have to hit the brakes. Yeah, I think that's probably the most important core mechanic, and it's the most important core mechanic for any game. I think it's the one thing you do throughout the game from beginning to end is move. So why aren't developers spending more time improving movement, trying to get that to feel right? Because it can make or break a game if you get that wrong.
Yeah, because I've noticed, again, this goes back to how Japanese developers also design their games versus some Western developers. Like with Little Big Planet, for example, it was pretty popular, but it's like when you play the controls of it, the movement for Little Big Planet is so imprecise. You kind of wonder, wait, how did this become a million seller? But when you compare it to like even say something like say Sonic Unleashed, the movement compared to other platforms is a little bit more precise. Yeah, Sonic is going really fast, so it might seem difficult to control him, but that's because he's going really fast. He doesn't just stop as soon as you let go of the button.
Yeah, moving around needs to be fun in its own right. If you just take control of Nim and you jump around from tree to tree and things like that, that needs to feel fluid. It needs to feel fun without any other mechanics in there. Sonic alone, just running around is fun. You could take all the badniks, all the rings out of Sonic. Just running around is still going to be fun. You have to get that right from the start.
Also, this was another question I wanted to ask because obviously with the Mega Drive screen size, you didn't have widescreen support, unfortunately. So when it came to like designing a stage, you had to obviously be a bit more mindful about Nim's like how much he's going to skid across the screen, didn't you? But if it was a widescreen, would you like think that I'd be a bit more comfortable with how the levels themselves are designed?
Yeah, with the widescreen version, we're also going with a new camera design as well. Because now we've got a bit more room to play with. We can move the camera around and try and make more use of the available space. I did have another camera design for the Mega Drive version where it would have a small window where you move left or right. It didn't move the camera until you hit a certain threshold. We experimented with a few designs like that, and none of them really worked. So we just returned to the Sonic style, rigid in the middle. That seemed to work better. But for the Dreamcast version, I want to revisit that, and I want to see what else we can do with the camera. Try and make more use of that space.
Yeah, because it was quite because like I think it was level 5. It was the graveyard also like the lights. It was like you only saw the shadows. Deadwood, that's it. Yes, that's right. Because at some points in that level, it's like you can't really tell where you're jumping towards because obviously you can't really do anything about it because the screen resolution you can't like randomly say, oh no, the Mega Drive's got widescreen support all of a sudden. So you probably had a few situations like that where you're like, you had to like be mindful of can the player take the leap of faith to get to that other platform.
Yeah, blind jumps is something I'd like to fix for the next one, either by changing some of the level design or better use of the camera. Sonic had a lot of that. There's a lot of places in Sonic you can just drop down, there'll be a badnik there, or the spike. I guess in Sonic's defense, he could be spinning, and that will kill whatever enemy's down there, where you can't do that with Nim.
Yeah, because you've got now, well, thankfully, because you had the re-release for Sonic 1 and 2 that Christian Whitehead did, where they added it with widescreen support. Like I remember playing the original Sonic, and I did hit badniks quite a few times because I couldn't see them coming. But now with the widescreen support, it's like, they're miles ahead of me. I can kill them straight away. So it's interesting to see how like the default screen size and widescreen makes such a massive difference on these games.
Yeah.
So I mean, we spoke about that. So let's talk about like your actual process with the Mega Drive. Has there been something cool you found out along the way?
Well, plenty. It was my first time coding for the system, so pretty much everything I learned was new and cool to me. I'd not worked with a system that had fixed frame rate before, so no floating point, delta time calculation, things like that. It was all done with fixed frames. I'd not worked with hardware that had hardware scrolling before. I'd not worked with a tile-based system before with separate sprite system. It was all new to me, and every time I learned something new, I thought it was interesting and entertaining to learn.
Right. There are also like in some parts because when Nim he like gets into the what the old called fuzzles, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when he changes colors once he activates one of them, did you have to like be mindful that because I remember in the Sonic games, like if they had to change the color palette for Sonic when he went Supersonic, something else might change. Did something like that happen with Tanglewood?
Yeah, all the way through development, you have to really design for that. You have to reserve palettes for certain objects, or you have to pack them in. It was one of the reasons why the checkpoints change color as Nim changes color. The
Right.
belly of the checkpoint lights up when you hit a checkpoint, but that's using the same palette as Nim. So if Nim hits a fuzzle and changes yellow, the checkpoint will change yellow too.
All
And
right. Yeah. I thought that was done purposely by you, but it wasn't a hardware limitation.
yeah, it was originally a hardware limitation, but I ran with it again, a feature, not a bug. I ran with it in the end because of that Deadwood level, because there were fuzzles in that Deadwood level, but Nim was black. You can't see what color the fuzzle was. So if I put a fuzzle nest next to a checkpoint and you'd hit the checkpoint, you pick up the power and the checkpoint changes color, so you can see it's a yellow one. So I left that in for that reason, for that level.
Interesting. That's it. It's always cool when you like have these little. You find out from the developer like it wasn't really meant to be a feature, but it actually worked out in the end. Because like when I'm reading the development history of Sonic and like they find out some things by accident, it's always interesting. Um, and obviously, like, so my last question was going to be like, what are you planning to do from here? Like, you're obviously talking about Tanglewood on the Dreamcast, but after that, are you looking for a Are you thinking about Tanglewood 2, or maybe even a new IP for the Mega Drive, or maybe on certain other Sega consoles?
I've got dev hardware for other consoles. I've got a 32X kit. I've got Saturn kits, but they're notoriously difficult to program for, and it lessens my audience even more. I'd like to, for the next game, I'd like to make a little bit of money. I think that'd be really nice.
So, yeah, no, everyone likes money, don't they? No one's going to complain. So, if that's the case, will you think of like maybe not designing it as like a Sega Mega Drive game first, or rather, it's going to be a PC game available for the PS4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, or whatever new consoles are coming out?
No, at least for the next game, I'm going to do Mega Drive again. I've already started a next game. It's going to be a sci-fi shooter with hover mechs.
Oh wow!
Ooh, okay, it's
Which
exclusive.
yeah, and it's very, very early stages at the moment. But I guess that leads back into we're talking about movement and getting movement fluid. I think the very first thing I've been trying is to get this hover mech to feel good to control and make sure it's nice and fast and responsive with smooth acceleration and things like that. So right now, all I've got is this hovercraft on screen, and I'm going to
Right.
spend getting the movement right. I'm
So,
going to do so many tweaks for that.
and how long do you think it's going to like before like you can start talking about the game and showing it off? Do you think, and maybe a potential release date?
Not sure at all yet. I'm going to try and, well, I'm hoping sales of the first game will give me enough to put together a prototype team. So I can hire. I'm going to see if Matthew Weeks wants to come back on board. The composer wants to come back on board, and we'll try and make a demo for it. And if that works out, we'll put it out in the public and see what they think of it, and see if we want to take it further. I've no idea what the timescale is going to be for that, but it's all happening slowly.
So you think maybe potentially you might return to Kickstarter and see, as long as the audience wants it, we can run with this.
Yeah, I'll turn to Kickstarter if we have to, if we don't make enough money to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
But that'll be necessity only, I think. It's a very stressful thing to do Kickstarter. Just for 18 months, you've got 900 people to answer for. And it's just really stressful knowing that you owe so many people a game over the course of almost 2 years.
Yeah, because obviously, a lot of people who do invest in these games are looking at from the outside. They don't really understand how stressful indie development is, and they usually get tired responses like, "Oh, this developer's so lazy," and it's like, "No, we're not lazy. It's just very, very difficult to manage all these things at once."
There's a lot to it, and it's extremely stressful over a very long period of time. So if I can afford to do it without Kickstarter, then I will. But that's still a safety net if I need to use it. We're also talking about a prequel to Tanglewood.
Ooh.
Obviously, you played the game, you've seen the story. I won't spoil it for your listeners, but there's a lot I want to wrap up there.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, if you come up with a Tanglewood 0 in this case, definitely I'd be like interested to try it out again, because that was when I first played, I was like, yes, because it's a Mega Drive game, because the Mega Drive is my favorite console, so that got me hyped. But by the end of it, it's like, oh, okay, I want to see more of this world and the lore in it.
Yeah, we're gonna touch on that. I've got so many documents with unused bits of story, cutscene designs, and things like that. There's a lot I'm going to put together for a prequel. There's some monsters there I've not used. There's even an entire level tile set that we haven't put in because we didn't have the space. So yeah, I've got
because you've also said you're going to put like a new level in the Dreamcast version and a few more boss fights. Because it's like, when I was playing the game, I was actually surprised by having you had a few boss fights. I was like, oh, I didn't expect this, because it was a puzzle platformer, to have as many boss fights as it did. But I think you've got quite a few in there.
You can never have too many boss fights. I think I'd like one per chapter next time. I'll see if I can cram that in. We'll see.
That's great. That's pretty much all the questions I had for you.
All right.
Is there anything else you want to ask, Barry?
No, I think you did a fantastic job co-interviewing with me, Javed. And I just wanted to thank Matt Phillips for his time speaking with us. Tanglewood, it's out on Steam. It's on Dreamcast it's going to be out on Dreamcast. It's out on Mega Drive, and it's out on Genesis. Can people still pre-order the Genesis and Mega Drive carts?
Yes, they can, if you go on our website.
Okay, and that's tanglewoodgame.com, and you can also search Steam for Tanglewood. It's $17.99 at the moment. It's a fantastic game, and the great thing is, and I didn't mention this, but you can play it on the Mac. And if you're a Mac owner like myself, not many games on Steam actually play on the Mac. So it made me really happy that I didn't have to switch over to the PC side, and I could just play the game. That was very cool. And so, if Javed doesn't have anything else to ask, I just want to thank Matt again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The SEGAbits Swingin Report Show is a production of SEGAbits. SEGAbits is a fan site that is not in any way officially affiliated with SEGA. Sonic the Hedgehog and all SEGA-related trademarks are copyright SEGA. All other featured trademarks are the property of their respective owners. Don't forget to check out SEGAbits.com, and you can find us on all major social networks. Just search SEGAbits.